Jean here with Waldorf-Inspired Learning, and I think we are live. So welcome to my monthly webinar at Home with Waldorf. I'm just going to give it a few minutes to make sure everybody can get in and make sure that we are live. There's a little bit of a delay, so it takes a couple minutes here to get things rolling. Just going to refresh the screen. Hopefully you can see and hear me. I can tell that some of you are here. So if you are watching at waldorfinspiredlearning.com, please type into the chat box if you are able to see and hear me. That would be really helpful. Always a good place to begin. All right. So I'm going to introduce myself in just a second. Hi, I'm Jean. I'm the founder of Waldorf-Inspired Learning, and today we're going to talk about Waldorf 101 for homeschoolers. I thought it would be a good month to get back to basics. So often we all finish the holidays and think we're going to get right back into things, and then January sort of floats along and February comes and we think we should be moving right along with our homeschooling lessons, but it doesn't always happen that way. So that's the topic for this month, Waldorf 101 for homeschoolers. And this is my free monthly webinar at Home with Waldorf. So thank you so much for joining me today. And if you see me looking over to my left, although to you maybe it's my right, I'm checking the chat box. So I have a separate screen with the chat box set up, and oh good, I'm so glad. So we have Beth and Evgenia, Asha, so happy to see you, and I'm glad you can see and hear me. So while we wait for a few more people to catch up here, a couple of things. If you're new here, there is a chat box that some of you have already found, but it's right below the video if you're watching on waldorfinspiredlearning.com. If you're on YouTube and you're on my mailing list, it would be great. You can only participate in the chat if you're over on the website. So hop on over there if you want to participate there. So we have Caroline. Good. I'm so glad to see so many of you here today. So let me just tell you a couple of things. I would love for you to say hello in the chat box. We do have a giveaway that I do toward the end of the webinar, and your way of entering the giveaway is by putting your name and where you're from into the chat. So if you can do that, that would be super helpful. And also just to let people know where you're from, because it's always fun to see Waldorf homeschoolers from all over the world. We have people from Iceland and Australia, and I'm in Ohio, and it always is amazing to me because this technology was not around when I first started homeschooling. So thanks for being here today. So I welcome everybody who's here live and anybody who's watching the replay. So glad you're able to take this time out to nourish yourself and get a little bit of training in. So again, my name is Jean, and I am a Waldorf homeschooler, mother of 3. I founded Waldorf-Inspired Learning about 3 years ago. And I help homeschoolers just like you to create their own homeschooling plan that's just right for their family. And I hope you do this in a way that is both doable, possible, and sustainable over the long haul, which I think is super important because the burnout rate is kind of high. I think with homeschooling in general, but Waldorf in particular. So let's see. Please do say hello in the chat, as I mentioned, and we're going to get right into the topic because I have a ton to share today. And Waldorf 101 for homeschoolers, it's a great topic whether you're brand new to Waldorf, whether you've been doing Waldorf for years and you just want a little bit of a boost at this time of year, or whether you're just beginning to get into it and you would really like to know what the anchor points are. So today we're going to talk about the 5 basic principles of Waldorf education, so that as you begin or as you check in with yourself about your lesson plans, so you can really have just 5 core areas that you look at and say, am I doing this? It's also a way to simplify and kind of scale back, because sometimes this method has just so many components to it that it can feel like, okay, yeah, and I'm supposed to do this, and oh yeah, and handwork and music and recorder, and we didn't do that, and I need a verse, and and it just keeps snowballing. And sometimes it can really help to just say, okay, what are the basics? So that's our topic for today. And hello to Sarah and Janine. Hi, Janine. So I'm going to switch over to my slides and start the presentation. And that sometimes can take just a second. So give me a moment here so I can share my screen. And I need to share this. Okay, I don't know if this is working yet or not, so I'm going to give it a second. If you can see my slides, please tell me that you can. All right, I don't know. This technology makes me nuts. All right, wait, I think it was working. No. Entire screen. Sorry, this step is the hardest part for me. Grr. Let's try this again. Share your screen. Here we go. Haha, sorry for the wonky look there. Okay. Now we got it. Yay! All right. Here we go. Thank you for your patience. All right, so it's February 2017, and this is At Home with Waldorf. And as I said, we are looking at Waldorf 101 for homeschoolers. So this just gives you a little outline of what we're going to be doing here. The first part is the meet and greet. So as I've mentioned, please say hello in the chat and tell us where you are from. That is super helpful and really fun for everybody to see all of us from all over the place. We will have this one piece of Waldorf wisdom this month, which is Waldorf 101, Back to Basics. We'll have time for Q&A. Please jot down your questions as we go along, and you can type them in the chat box, and we'll have some time dedicated to that in a little bit. I share a couple of verses and songs for this time of year. And then I have some special offers for you today, as well as a quote of the month from Rudolf Steiner. So that's how the webinar goes. I do hope that you will stay to the end. I encourage you to do so because I have a really nice giveaway, which is my planning guide for one lucky winner. Plus, everyone gets a special coupon code for 20% off the guide, or you can get a free planning guide with if you book a mentor session with me, and I'll tell you a little bit about how those go in a little bit. So you're in the right place. If you're a Waldorf homeschooler and you have so many resources on your shelves that you aren't sure where to begin, you sometimes feel lost at sea. You may also just be starting with Waldorf and you don't really know where to begin. Or you just want to know what those main anchor points and basic principles are so that you can get back to basics here. You may also have some experience with homeschooling, but you get so wrapped up in the details that it can be kind of confusing, which we've probably all been there. And perhaps you want some action steps for each of the 5 basic principles, which I'm going to give you today, which I'm really excited about. So Waldorf Wisdom 101 for homeschoolers, that's the topic. And just to give you a couple of tips, especially if you're new to webinars, that if the screen freezes or you lose any kind of connection, then just hit the little refresh button and it should fix things. Usually if things freeze, it just takes a couple minutes and they come back. So hopefully that will be true today too. And please do participate in the chat box because it really helps with making everything more interesting for all of us. So thank you. I'm so glad it's working. Great. Okay. So here we go. I want to just tell you a little story, short story of my journey to Waldorf homeschooling. So here, I'm the mother of 3. I have 2 boys and a girl. Here are my guys when they were little tots. I know they look adorable here, but they look pretty wild. So I have 2 boys and a girl. And this is before my daughter was born. And this was the point in our journey when we decided we were going to be, we weren't homeschoolers yet, but we wanted to bring Waldorf education to our children. So we had just moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where we live now. My husband grew up here and his mother was ill. And so we moved back here to help take care of her. And when we got here, I discovered, oh, there is no Waldorf school in Cleveland, Ohio, much to my surprise. So I met some other like-minded moms and we decided, well, let's just start a school. So we worked on that for quite a few years. Did not get a school off the ground, unfortunately. And there is one here now, by the way. Just brand new, 3 years old, but this was 4 years ago. And it became time to make a decision about school, and we chose to homeschool inspired by Waldorf. So let me just paint a little bit of a picture. The year was 1994, I believe. No Facebook, no cell phones. There was an internet, but it was nothing like it is today. And it was really hard. It was really hard to find material, to discover how to bring this method to my family. So I read a ton of books. I went to workshops and I did everything that I could to learn about the Waldorf method. Okay, so then what happened was, like many of you may have experienced, I became incredibly overwhelmed. And the overwhelm really just took over. I didn't know, my to-do list kept getting longer and longer and longer, and I didn't know what was most important. I wanted just somebody to sit me down and say, okay, if you focus on these couple of things, you'll be doing great. So that's what I want to offer you today is a real sense of what the core principles are, so that if you're new or if you're overwhelmed and want to know what's most important, you'll have this list in your head to check against. So that's the goal for today. So first I want to ask you, tell me what you think the 5 basic principles of Waldorf are. And if you can only think of 1 or 2, that's fine. But please type them in the chat because I'm super curious what you would say the basic principles are of Waldorf education. And while you're doing that, I'm going to just go over a little bit of a summary of Waldorf education that some of you may know and some of you may not. Give me 1 second, refreshing the chat box here. Okay. Here we go. So what exactly is Waldorf? All right, I'm going to just write these down. It was founded by Rudolf Steiner in 1919. That's almost 100 years ago. And it was created for a classroom setting. So as homeschoolers, that gives us a lot of leeway, right? I know for many of us, especially in the beginning, we want to imitate the classroom, but you'll find that it's actually much more freeing, that you don't have to. All right, so it was created for grades 1 through 8. There was no kindergarten initially, and that was started about 5 years in. No, probably 6 or 7 years in, because it was after Rudolf Steiner had passed away that the first kindergarten was created. So here are 2 really important points. One is that the method was, Rudolf Steiner started this method in response to the devastation of World War I. In Europe, and he wanted to create a method of education that would contribute to the social and economic renewal, particularly of Germany, that had been devastated by the war. And in his mind, it was an alternative. This method is really an alternative to the typical lecture note-taking textbook teaching that was predominant in schools in Europe at the time, almost 100 years ago. All right, so I'm going to share a couple things from the chat box that people have mentioned as the basic principles of Waldorf. Connection to nature, head, heart, and hands, a love of learning, art, and a sort of mind, body, and spirit approach. So those are all really good descriptions of Waldorf. I'm going to give you my list here of the 5 basic principles. And these are the real, like what you all have described are great, just like overviews of Waldorf education, but these are really specific areas that are key to this method. And we're going to go through these areas, and I'm going to give you a couple of action steps for each one. So, here's the list of the 5 basic principles of Waldorf, the Waldorf method: rhythm, child development, inner work, main lesson blocks, and the lively arts. Okay, so let's start with rhythm. This is just the basics of rhythm. And yes, the whole child approach too, Asha, very good. So, the rhythm is really, yes, and it's a hands-on method for sure. So rhythm is really like a steady, repeated pattern. So think of music, right? The steady rhythm of a beat. And even if it changes up a little bit, like that rhythm continues to be repeated, and it helps build predictability. So when we're listening to music, often we enjoy music because we have this prediction of what's going to come. And it takes a lot less effort when there are strong rhythms already established. Children feel more comfortable, and it helps with cooperation and connection. Yeah, so here are some ways of using rhythm in learning in particular. And We all know, we're familiar with lots of rhythms all around us, which include the year, right? One year follows another year, or include the seasons and the months. And lessons are planned in Waldorf education in these main lesson blocks, which we're going to go into in more detail in just a minute, because there is a rhythm to it. And Steiner's idea of rhythm was very much based on this concept of sleep on it. So you've heard that before, like you learn something new and then let's sleep on it, or you're not going to make a decision until you sleep on it, or that kind of thing. And we can use this concept as we're looking at planning our lessons. So we teach new material on one day, which might be day one. We engage artistically with it, and then we review it on the next day. And the most important part of that is that there is sleep in between those activities. So this is referred to as a 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm. Now, it is interesting, and I just saw somebody on Facebook post, a lot of people talk about a 3-part lesson in a 3-day rhythm, and I would just argue, if you go back and read Steiner himself and you talk to really experienced Waldorf teachers, that it's a 2-day rhythm that he's talking about. Not a 3-day rhythm, because if you spread out these 3 steps over 3 days, it can feel a lot less a lot more watered down and a lot less rich. So just trust me on that. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of action steps. If you need help establishing rhythm, my suggestion always is to choose one rhythmic activity at a time to add to your days. So it could be something as simple as reciting a blessing before dinner time. If you already have that one down, it could be adding a warm-up verse before lessons. And I'm going to give you a couple today that you might like to use for a warm-up verse and a closing verse. And it could be something fun, like creating a food tradition. We very early on, when my boys were probably like 9 and 10, we started a pizza movie night because every one of their friends watched television. We did not, but we felt like, hey, you know, they're old enough, it's time to introduce that in our family, and we didn't want them to feel completely deprived. So we started this tradition of pizza movie night on Saturday nights, and we always picked the movies. So they would be things like, you know, Mary Poppins or Singing in the Rain, or old classics that we really wanted to watch. But it was a lot of fun, and my kids adored it, and they would invite their friends over because we'd make handmade pizza. So those kinds of traditions, you know, like pancakes on Saturdays or a taco night or something, can be really fun for the family and also help establish rhythm. If you need more help with rhythm, then you can go to this blog post that I wrote called Rhythm is Always the Answer, and it describes that 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm really carefully, specifically, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes that you'll find under the video after, like when the replay is up. Okay, so that was the first of the 5 basic principles, is rhythm. Very important. The second of the principles is child development, and someone in the chat box mentioned this. So yeah, this is really an important part of Waldorf education. And Steiner talked about the 3 stages of child development. You might be familiar with these. And they are 0 to 7, 7 to 14, and 14 to 21. Now, interestingly, these actually continue throughout our lives, the stages, these 7-year cycles, but these are the ones we're focused on when we talk about educating children. So the first stage during the years of 0 to 7, it's really important for children to be engaged in movement, activity, and experiences. That's really our role, is they learn by doing. or through that concept of will. Will is consciously willed movement. And they learn by doing, and we want to make sure that we're giving them plenty of doing experiences. It can be really tempting at this stage to start teaching directly our children. And it's fine. They're going to begin exploring. Some kids learn to read at age 4. Some kids learn to read at age 6. They teach themselves that. But we really want to hold off on direct instruction until they're about 7 years old, until after the change of teeth, it's often referred to. Because this is when their bodies are freed up to focus more on lessons. So the second cycle of 7 years is the elementary years that most of us are thinking about when we're talking about homeschooling. And these are the years when we want to feed our children with art, is what Steiner said. So the lively arts, I'm going to get into more specifically in a little bit, but this is how we bring the lessons to our children. And then the years of 14 to 21 are the thinking years, and this is when real, true academic work is most appropriate. Okay. Let me see. So here are some action steps for child development that I want to introduce to you. And the first is really just a personal introspection question. And that is to ask yourself, are you planning lessons based on these concepts of child development, or are you planning lessons out of pressure or comparison with other homeschoolers or the classroom? Because so often I think we feel like we're not doing enough. You know, Waldorf education is really a slow education, particularly in the early years. That does not mean that nothing's happening. And that, I think, is critical. If you were to sit down and make a list of the activities that you do, even with your 4-year-old or with your 8-year-old, if you were to make a list of what you do with your children, there would be so many learning markers in there. And with young children, those markers are really the pre-literacy skills and the pre-math skills, but they are they lay a critical foundation for later learning. And for literacy, those include reading aloud to a child, all kinds of language experiences, so poetry recitation, even singing, and stories. All of those lay the foundation for later reading and writing, but you don't do the reading and writing yet. You just do the foundational experiences in the early years. So that's why I think it's really important to have an understanding of Steiner's view of child development when you are engaging in the Waldorf approach. Every single method of learning has a theory of child development behind it, you know, whether it is explicitly stated or not. And there are a lot of educational theorists who agreed with Steiner in sort of the basic structure, particularly the idea that abstract learning is not really appropriate until kids are more between the ages of 12 and 14. So oftentimes people are saying, well, what do we do then until that point? And that's where all these wonderful, rich activities with the lively arts come in. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I want to just offer, though, that if you want to read more about this, there's a wonderful post that I have called What to Consider When Creating Waldorf Curriculum. And this has really interesting details of each stage in Steiner's own words. And he talked about, it's reflections on one of his lectures to the very first Waldorf teachers. And in it, he talks about what we want to feed our children at each stage. And it's fascinating to me because he talks about feeding our children through our connection, our physical connection to them in the early years, and then through the arts in the elementary years, so that, and I just love this, he says, so that their independent judgment and personality can sparkle in when they are adolescents. So it does take some trust, I think, this method, but at the same time, know that, you know, this is a method, like I said, that's been around for 100 years. There's so much anecdotal evidence. I have my own 3 children, plus I've taught in Waldorf-inspired groups and in bigger eclectic homeschooling groups where I've brought sort of secretly Waldorf lessons or blocks to that learning, and it just works. I mean, the developmental markers of this method are so spot on, I find, over and over and over again. So it does take some trust, but believe me, it's really worth it. So having an understanding of that is a crucial point. So that was the second of the 5 basic principles. The third is inner work. And a lot of people wonder what inner work is. So what Steiner said was, you will not be good teachers if you focus only on what you do and not upon who you are. That's a tall order. I remember early on when I showed you that picture of my boys when they were little, I remember inner work was so baffling to me. I did not understand the concept at all. And I thought, you mean on top of planning my own lessons, because there was no published curriculum, planning my own lessons, bringing all these different components of all of the arts to my children, understanding child development, understanding rhythm. I'm supposed to be doing some work on myself too. But it really does make a huge, huge difference. Steiner had a number of exercises that he created for teachers, really also just for adults, for humans. They basically are all around prayer, different forms of prayer meditation. And these days, there's so many mindfulness practices that we can tap into. And I think really any of these can help. So, I just love this definition of inner work from my friend Sheila. And she said, inner work is really anything you do to get quiet. And as moms, we know, oh my goodness, don't we? The importance, but also the rarity of having times to ourselves where we can get quiet. So however you can do this, it's worth it. It is so, so worth it. So to me, it's important to have some kind of daily practice of inner work. So here are some action step suggestions. And again, focus on just one at a time. Try one for the next couple of weeks. You may already have some form of an inner work practice. If you're not doing it every day, then I would try to increase the frequency. If you don't have a practice, or if it's fallen by the wayside, which happens all the time, right? We get into a certain practice for a while and then it slips away. So pick something, you know, a morning meditation where you sit quietly by yourself. That may not be possible. My kids always got up before I did when they were really little. A walking meditation has always been a favorite form of meditation for me, where I put on some sort, you know, I'm listening to some sort of guided meditation while I'm out walking. Artistic practice is really great for inner work, and it will give you the experience of what it is your children, the experience they have when they do some kind of focused artistic, you know, experience, event, you know, project. I do have an inner work episode of At Home with Waldorf where I have a chat with my friend Sheila, who is studying spiritual direction. So you may want to watch that episode on inner work about developing your own creative practice. And you can find all those episodes On my website, there's a tab that says free resources, and the very first drop down is At Home with Waldorf webinars. And when you click that, you'll see a list of all the webinars that I've done. All right, now we are on to principle number 4, I believe, and that is main lesson blocks and books. So this is, to me, one of the beauties of the Waldorf approach. And I remember one year I bought an Oak Meadow curriculum. It was when my daughter was born. So I had these 2 boys in elementary grades, and I had a brand new baby, and I was really overwhelmed. And, you know, even today, sometimes Oak Meadow is perceived as the most open and go, quote unquote, Waldorf curriculum. It's not completely Waldorf based, but it is considered to have some influence by Waldorf. So I bought an Oak Meadow, I think it was a 4th grade curriculum, and I spent weeks in the summer trying to turn it into, you know, the whole year's curriculum into main lesson blocks. It was a disaster. I think I spent so much time, and I think my boys lasted, I don't know, 2 weeks on it, maybe not even 2 weeks. Don't try that. I always encourage people to create their own blocks. You can really make a main lesson block out of just about any topic or book you want to. I give the caveat that it's really important to remember those developmental markers when you're creating your own main lesson blocks. And you can find lists, including one on my website, of the story curriculum that Steiner suggested for each grade. But this concept of the blocks, it works so well. It keeps things interesting instead of getting sort of a boring old, same old, you know, 5 subjects every day, day after day, all year. And it mixes things up, right? You can weave children's interest in, et cetera, et cetera. So I just can't say enough about main lesson blocks. So topics are taught in blocks of 3 to 6 weeks. Steiner actually in a couple of different places said 2 weeks, and in another place he said 8 weeks. And then what you do is you plan a block, say it's around Roman history, you're doing it for 4 weeks, and then you spend 1.5 hours to 2 hours on main lesson work each morning. Some people only homeschool 3 days a week, some 4, some 5. I think in the early years, 3 days a week is perfectly fine. However, I've always found a 4-day-a-week homeschool week to be really, really great, because if you overlay that idea of a 2-part lesson, then 4 days is perfect, because you present new material on days 1 and 3 out of those 4 days then. So you can really utilize that 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm. Main lesson books then are a replacement really for textbooks and those dreaded worksheets. So that's main lesson blocks and books. And here are a couple of action steps that you can take around main lesson blocks that I think would be really helpful. So the first, again, is an introspective question, which is the rhythm of your current main lesson block system really, is it working? So ask yourself that question first. I'm going to give you a second to think about it. Is the way you are delivering main lesson blocks working right now or not? And you can even type in the chat box. I'd be really curious to hear what you think about that. Okay. And then you want to decide which blocks to create books for. You do not have to create main lesson books for every single block, which I think is very freeing. A lot of people just assume that you do it a certain way and that every main lesson block needs a main lesson book. I think especially as homeschoolers, it is really helpful to know that that does not need to be the case. And even I know Waldorf schools in class, Waldorf teachers in Waldorf classrooms who don't create books for every block because it gets so lockstep, you know, and it becomes then rote and no longer alive. So I always think it's a good idea to look at which blocks you want to create the books for, and maybe you're only creating 3 or 4 in the year instead of, if you have 6 blocks in the whole year, you know, maybe only 3 or 4 of those have a book to go with them. Okay, so a couple people are saying I haven't started blocks yet because my kids are still really young, and I have a high schooler, so would main lesson blocks, would they still take the place of books? So that's a great question, Eileen. And the answer is yes and no. So in high school, a lot of people start using textbooks. I particularly used one for math, and I don't love textbooks, so I don't tend to use them for every subject, but there's a mix usually in high school, especially for homeschoolers, of doing main lesson blocks over one subject, but also having a couple subjects that run in the background all year. So for us, that running in the background all year was math, because I think math practice is something that's needed every day, and history in some ways, because doing history, there's so much history to get in, right? So there's reading fiction, there's reading nonfiction, et cetera, et cetera. So really, it's a combination in high school. All right, so Sabrina has a question about, instead of main lesson books, what might you be doing? And the answer to that is you could record the learning in some other way, but perhaps it's just paintings and drawings that you collect and put together, but you're not writing the summary up. Or say you're doing a block like that's a gardening, you're creating a garden and growing food in 3rd grade. I think 3rd grade's a really good example because it's such a doing year, and it's critical, I think, to really get that experiential learning in 3rd grade. So if you're creating a garden, you could just take photographs of the garden and put together some little scrapbook for it. Or you could take photographs and write up a little summary to go with it, but you're making the book a little differently than you would a normal main lesson book. I think it's just really nice to mix it up some, because it can, if you end up homeschooling for 8 years and every single year you're following this main lesson block rhythm or format and making main lesson books, that's a lot of main lesson books, and it can get kind of dry. So I think it's good to mix them up. Yeah, so Eugenia's saying it works for the 7-year-old but not for the 4- and 2-year-old yet, which is absolutely true. So for the 4- and 2-year-old, you do not need to be making main lesson books, or really organizing the learning in blocks, although you can. The best way to do that is to look at the seasons. And so your main lesson block in the early years are really focused around stories and songs and verses. So you might, you know, spring is coming up, so maybe you have a favorite book that you're going to share, or a fairy tale that you're going to share about springtime, and then you would bring in different activities that were related to that, but you would not be making a main lesson book. Okay, let's see. Janine's saying I'm having trouble with main lesson, so tell me a little bit more about that. Oh, so using stories and then artistic activity, but not themes yet. Okay. Yeah, and the scrapbook idea is really fun, Sabrina. One year we, some of you might have heard this story, but I was so tired of the main lesson book approach, just in the moment. And we were going on a trip to the beach, and my kids had never been on an airplane and they had never been to the ocean before. So, but it was in the middle of February, and I felt like, that feeling of I can't just do nothing, right? Because it's the middle of the school year. So I gave them each a disposable camera, my boys, and we took this trip, and they created like a scrapbook of the trip. And then the really cool thing was that we had it color printed and gave it to my parents as a thank you gift, because they're the ones who invited us to the beach. So that was really fun. Okay, so I'm just checking the chat box here. So for a 3-year-old, not sure what we would teach. So it's really important to remember that you're not teaching in the kindergarten years as much as you are creating experiences. You do not need to teach them their colors or numbers or letters. You just don't. Some of them will learn them. If they ask you questions, answer their questions. You don't want to frustrate them by any means, but your goal is to create the space for really rich play that hopefully taps into the stories that you're sharing, and then experiences like baking or making soup, or going on a field trip to watch people plant a garden or build a house or any of those things. So you aren't necessarily considered a teacher in those years. You're really, you create a space and you hold that space, and then you bring them lots and lots of activities, movement and songs and rhythmic things to lay the foundation for later language and math learning. Okay, so I hope that that helps. Yeah, Amanda's saying fewer and fewer main lesson books. I think especially 3rd grade, Amanda. I'm not kidding. I just think it's such a hands-on year, and you could go the whole year without making even one main lesson book if you wanted. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for all your comments. This is great. Yeah, and nature blocks, no need to do a main lesson book either. Okay. All right, so that was a great discussion. So for sure, decide which blocks you're going to make books for in grades 1 through 8, and which you're not going to make books for. Okay. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer made it. Yay. Good. We have some new people here. Shannon, Koenig, and you have a 5 and a 3-year-old. And hi to Jennifer. All right, it's great. Okay, so stories, songs, and verses, that works. Very good to hear that. Wait, I saw a question. More about the 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm. So the 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm, I'm going to say briefly now, and then hopefully we can come back to this during the Q&A. But the 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm, the 3 parts are presenting new material, engaging with it artistically, and then integrating it somehow, which is usually through writing a summary. So this works really well in a main lesson book, where the very first day you present new material through story. Okay, so you're reading or telling a story about, whatever your topic is. Then perhaps that same day or the next day, you're doing some artistic activity like a painting or a drawing or a model of it with beeswax or a diorama or some kind of artistic activity. And then you sleep on it, and the next day you come back to it and you review what you learned with your child. At home, you can have a little more back and forth. You don't have to like call on them and put them on the spot, but you can help them out. And then you write up a summary in a main lesson book. If you're not creating a main lesson book, you still want to do that summary verbally a little bit. So yeah. Okay, good. I hope that answers the question, at least for now. All right, so now for the lively arts. This is my favorite part of Waldorf education, and This is a new image that I created because I love that there are really 8 lively arts. I have a wonderful article called The 7 Lively Arts because Steiner listed 7 lively arts. He talked about replacing the 7 liberal arts with the 7 lively arts. But storytelling was not one of those. And the only reason he didn't mention storytelling was because it was the most important one. It didn't need mentioning. So, and the really fun thing for me is that my logo is this amazing star that I created. This is from a paper window star that I folded and put up in my window, which I love. And each point has one of these lively arts. So storytelling, movement, speech, drama, music, modeling, drawing, and painting. So those are the lively arts of Waldorf education. Okay, so here are some action steps. And I'm just making a note of a question. Okay, here are some action steps for the lively arts. And again, I encourage you to pick one. So if there's one that you feel like you've left out altogether for years even, right, pick that one. Or if there's one that you're really interested in but you aren't really doing much of right now, pick that one. Or if you haven't really done any of the lively arts, even in the kindergarten years, you could pick that one. So if it's the kindergarten years, I would suggest it being either verses or music or storytelling. Excuse me, one sec. Sorry. Oh, good. Nicole, I'm so glad you love the visual. I'm so excited about it myself. So I have this article, The 7 Lively Arts. I haven't updated the visual yet. I'm getting there, but it's full of tons of ideas about how to weave each of these lively arts into your lessons. It's on my website. It's free. It's under that free resources tab, articles, and it's called The 7 Lively Arts, and it gives lots of really specific examples. So if you need some more help, then go there. And you will find that. Okay, so a couple of questions about both rhythm and, let's see, what was the other question? Oh, about the 3-part lesson in the 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm. So if you go back to an earlier slide about rhythm, you'll see that 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm. I'll also include a link to that post. I think it's Rhythm is Always the Answer is the post, the title of the post. But I'll put a link under the replay when that is up so that you can go read that article because it's going to give you a lot more details. And how does rhythm change in the older years? That's a really good question, Angelica. And it really changes in, the rhythm is still there, and the 3-part lesson in a 2-day rhythm is still there. So that doesn't change. What changes is, I think, how you bring it to them. And you'll find it will evolve as your kids grow. It really does. You'll find that you begin to adapt to what works for them. Some people, a lot of people will say, oh, you have to do your main lessons in the morning. Well, some kids, it's really better right after lunch. Or if you have more than one child, it's a completely different situation too. So when you have more than one child, you end up having to either create main lesson blocks that suit everybody, or you have to stagger your main lessons, and that affects the rhythm as well. So there are lots of ways to do this. All right, so I just want to review before we get into more. If there are any more questions, I just want to review. And the purpose of this review is that these are the 5 basic principles of the Waldorf method, And here's what I want you to think about. Anytime you're feeling overwhelmed or anytime you're feeling like you need a little bit of extra help, go through these 5 principles and say to yourself, ask yourself, is my rhythm sound? Do I have a well-established rhythm? What is my rhythm? You know, and rhythm is more, it's not really a schedule. It's tying your activities to one to another, basically. So meaning you have breakfast, and what do you do right after that? You do chores, and then after that you do lessons, and then after that you go for a walk. That would be your rhythm of the day. So establish a solid rhythm. Okay, and then ask yourself, do I have an understanding of Steiner's principles or stages of child development? That's really important too. Then ask yourself, do I have an established inner work practice, a daily inner work practice? Okay, it might only be 15 minutes for now at this stage of your life, but you can create a daily inner work practice for yourself. Very important. And then ask yourself, if your children are in the grades, ask yourself, do I have my main lesson blocks planned solidly? Is it working for us right now, or do I need to tweak it in some way? And then finally, ask yourself, am I weaving in the lively arts? And again, I would suggest going and having a look at that article on my website. All right, so if there are any more questions, this is your time to put them in the chat. And I would like to also say that if you have not said hello in the chat, now is the time to do that, because I am going to do the drawing in just a minute. So I'm making my little list here. We have a lot of people on this call. Okay, so I don't see any more questions right now. So I'm going to share with you a couple of verses. I'm not going to do all of them as per my usual because of time, but I just do want to say that there will be a PDF, a free downloadable PDF of these verses, again, below the replay that you can download and print if you want. And I'll also mark where in the replay, in the video, this comes up in case you want to hear me reading them again. So the two I want to share are the first one and the last one. So the first one's called Morning Sun, and the last one is Warm Our Hearts. And I think they're really great verses for really any age children to start and finish our, to create the bookends really of our lesson time, or our time that we're experiencing, you know, engaging in activities together. Okay, so here's the first one called Morning Sun. With joy we greet the morning sun, who shines with love on everyone, who shines in the sky, on the land and sea, and who fills me with light when he shines on me. Okay, and then the last one is Warm Our Hearts, and we did this for years as our closing verse. And I always think it's really nice, especially for your rhythm, for your year, to pick up the same opening and closing verse for months at a time. It could even be your whole year. We usually would switch it up like once or twice during the year, but do the same one for a while. So here's a nice closing verse. Warm our hearts, O sun, and give light that we may daily live, growing as we ought to be, true and good and strong and free. All right. Okay, so I'm going to now just talk to you a little bit about, mention that I've been doing At Home with Waldorf webinars since December of 2015. So there are lots of replays on some of these various subjects that we're talking about today. You might enjoy going and checking them out. You can watch them on YouTube or on my website. The benefit of my website is that they have the show notes, as I've said, with some links to other articles and verses and songs for you. Some of the topics include discovering the lively arts, Waldorf homeschooling with multiple ages, and movement and games for homeschooling. This is the very most popular one, most watched one on YouTube, the multiple ages one, and it's been watched over 500 times, which I think is kind of fun. It's fun for me. So, okay. I am going to type in this number. I'm just setting up for the giveaway here. So I have typed into my random number generator, and the winner of the giveaway. All right, and I'll get back to the chat box in just a second. The winner of the giveaway is Susan McElliott. McElliott. Did I have that right? Susan McElliott. So Susan, if you are still here, say hi. Congratulations, Susan. So this is, you're going to get my planning guide, and thank you so much for being here. You can email me, Jean@waldorf-inspiredlearning.com, and I will send it off to you. So congratulations to Susan. And I hope to hear from you, Susan. So, all right, a couple more questions here before I wrap things up. Yay, Susan. So hang on, it's moving so quickly. Would you recommend a good rhythm for 2 kindergartners and a 3rd grader? Just starting. So I would say that your rhythm is going to be really established as a family, but you want to also have time to work with just your 3rd grader on curriculum. So your rhythm is going to be something like you all come together for some verses and songs, and then the kindergartners can go off and play while you work one-on-one with the 3rd grader, and then you come back together again for a snack or whatever it is. And you may need to begin to have the 3rd grader do some independent work if he or she is ready, like reading on her own or doing some of her drawing on her own or that kind of thing. All right. Now, thank you. Yeah, in Brazil. It's hard when there's no homeschooling support. So yeah, Alessandra, I would say check out my other webinars and my website, because I think you will feel heartened that there are a lot of us out there who are doing this. So, and Amanda, thank you. I do offer, and I'm going to show you now my special offers for all of you. I do have 20% off my planning guide, and you can use this coupon code FEBBASICS to order the guide. So when you get to the sales page for the planning guide, you just put in this coupon code and it takes the discount off for you. So instead of $27, it would be $21. And if you want to purchase a mentor session, so I am here to guide you for any of you who would like to do that. I have packages of 1 hour or 4 hours. I have a special offer of giving you a free planning guide when you purchase a mentor session. So that offer is good through, good through Friday night at midnight, both of those. So the Feb Basics or the offer of a free planning guide with a mentor session. If you want the guide with the mentor session, you're going to need to email me, because it's not set up to send it to you automatically. Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for all your appreciation. I really do. Oh, it warms my heart. Okay, Angelica, she just moved to a small town in Colorado, no homeschooling groups. And I think, you know, Angelica, sometimes you can get together with other homeschoolers and you offer the Waldorf approach. You know, you have a play date once a week and you bring the songs and the story or the craft or whatever it is. That's what we had to do for a number of years. Okay, so I get a question a lot about what's in the planning guide. It gives you a framework for planning out your month, day, week, etc. It gives you step-by-step about how to build your main lesson blocks. It gives you sample forms, and then there are charts of resources for every single block in every grade 1 through 8. My favorite resources for each block. So lots of encouragement too. The way my mentor sessions work is that you can book an hour, 4-hour block, and you get a questionnaire. So the questionnaire is pretty detailed, and then we book a time for our session. We dig deep into your needs, and then I send a follow-up email with some real specific suggestions and resource ideas for you. A lot of people say the follow-up email is the best, one of the best parts of the whole thing. Oh, thanks, Sabrina. Sabrina says my guide is great. All right, and I just want to mention really quickly, I also host a live training. So if any of you want to come to Ohio in August, the Taproot Teacher Training is a wonderful experience. I host this with my mentor, Barbara Dewey. We have 7 presenters. The groups are really small, so you get tons of personalized attention. The size of the participants is usually, I think this year, I think we have a cap at maybe 26 people. So it's a very small group. And with 7 presenters, that means you have these really intimate experiences with other Waldorf homeschoolers on the path. So please come if you can. Here's the Steiner quote of the month. Yeah, thank you for those who've been here. I really appreciate it. So here's the quote. Waldorf school education is not a pedagogical system, but an art. The art of awakening what is actually there within the human being. And I just love this because I think it really helps us with all that we've been talking about today and these 5 basic principles. We are not trying to create the perfect curriculum to fit it all in. That is not what we're trying to do. It's there already. It's there in our children. They were born, they came to us with everything. All the gifts are in there. And our job is just to awaken that, right? We get to create the experiences, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful privilege. All right. You can connect with me on Pinterest, on Facebook, on YouTube, or all these webinars from At Home with Waldorf, and you can email me, Jean@waldorfinspiredlearning.com. Remember that the deal for the planning guide, the basics, is only good through Friday night, the 10th, as well as the mentor session, getting a free planning guide with it. So thank you all for being here. I really love doing these, and it's such a fun way for me to connect. I've really gotten to know some people by doing this. I've been doing it for a year, and it will continue. So see you next time, Tuesday, March 7th. We're going to start diving into the lively arts, and we're going to talk next time about stories as the foundation of this whole approach. So I'm going to talk about stories for the kindergarten years, how to choose stories, how to bring stories. So I'm really looking forward to that. And thanks again, everybody, for being here. Bye. See you next time. Bye.